Yeah, just go ahead and start, and Kadongo will say if he's good. Eunice is on the way. Okay.
Good morning. Welcome to the third and final day of our, um, excuse me. Welcome to the third and final day of Let My People Go, an interfaith conference on mass incarceration. If you've been able to be with us for the last 2 days, then I'm sure you have high expectations for today. Because personally, I have been blown away by the quality of the content of our amazing expert panelists and speakers, and it has just felt like an enormous privilege to be a part of this experience this weekend. And I'm really looking forward to today. We have two really exciting presentations. Starting off right now, we have a panel of student activists with uh, led by Professor Michael Nixon from Andrews University as a moderator, and then with students from here at Yale as well as at Princeton who are doing really exciting good work in the issue of mass incarceration. And so I'm sure that you're going to have a wonderful experience today. Also, later today at 11:45, after a short break, we will have a vote of thanks time where we're going to just appreciate everyone who has done so much to make this possible behind the scenes, and then also provide some resources for you if you're interested in getting more involved in this issue. And then finally, at 12:15, we're going to end things with a charge by Claudia M. Allen, and you will not want to miss that either. It is going to be amazing. So just to get things going again, I would love to hear where you all are coming from. Over the last weekend, we've had people from Brazil, from across the U.S., from India, from Romania. It has been just beautiful to see the kaleidoscope of nations represented in this conference. And so I would just encourage you right now to use the Q&A feature. You're going to be using that later in this panel to submit your own questions to the audience. So now is a great time to practice. We just want to see where you're coming from and how you're feeling about the conference. So we've already got, it looks like we've got someone coming from Washington, someone coming from India. We've got Faith from Indiana. We have Robert from Pennsylvania, Lehigh Valley. Um, it is so great. And I think we have some people chiming in on the chat as well. We're actually going to disable chat. I haven't done that yet. And we just encourage you to use the Q&A feature just to keep everything together. And yeah, so it's just so great to see you all on here. We're looking forward to a beautiful event today. And so to get things kicked off, I just want to introduce our moderator for this panel. Professor Michael Nixon is the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Andrews University. He began his work at the age of 29 and is the first to serve in this position at Andrews. He is also an adjunct professor in the History and Political Science Department, where he also advises pre-law students. Prior to this work, Michael served as the legal coordinator to the Fair Housing Justice Center in New York City. He has a law degree from the John Marshall Law School in Chicago, Illinois, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science from Andrews University. Welcome, Professor Michael Nixon, to the stage.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much for inviting me to moderate this panel. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to this amazing conference. I'm sure you have been enriched and inspired, as I have been, through some of the multitude of panelists, of moderators, of presenters. And so I'm excited to just assist our presenters for this exciting panel on criminal justice, student activists involved with criminal justice, to bring forth some of the exciting work that they are doing. As Stephen noted, pardon me, please submit your questions in the Q&A panel. The way things will go, as some of the other panels have gone, so if you've been with us, you'll know, is that we will have three panelists make presentations of about 15 minutes. And after those presentations are made, we will spend the balance of our time with the panelists answering your questions. So please feel free, as something comes to your mind or as something pops up to the surface as these powerful presentations are being made, drop a note in the Q&A section, and we will get to them at the second half of our time together. And my friend Renee will help us work through those questions. So without further ado, we're going to start with our first presenter, and I'll introduce our presenters as they present. And our first presenter is going to be Jalen King. Jalen King is a junior at Yale studying molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. Currently, he serves as the executive director of Black Students for Disarmament at Yale, BSDY. Jalen helps oversee BSDY's activities in fighting for the abolition of the Yale Police Department and the redistribution of its funds into New Haven community organizations and activities. Jalen has led various protests, demonstrations, and teach-ins centered around abolition and community care, and he is dedicated to forging better relationships between Yale and the greater New Haven area. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jalen in to make his presentation, and we're excited to hear from you, Jalen. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Michael. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen to show a little. Oh, it says the screen sharing is not enabled, so I don't know if I need to be made a co-host or anything. But I guess like giving a little bit more background. Yeah, I'm a junior at Yale. I'm excited to be here.
You're good now.
And it's good now. Okay, thank you so much, Impilo. So this is a presentation I have made. It's just, the presentation is intended to be just somewhat of a like introductory presentation into our student group and kind of what we've been able to do on campus, as well as a few things that we've been able to do within the New Haven community centered around abolition and just fighting for different racial and social justices and addressing different inequities within the greater New Haven community. So the first thing I have is a video that I'd like to play. This is a picture up from a social media series that we did last year to commemorate a year since the shooting of Stephanie Washington and Paul Witherspoon. We did a week-long social media series on Instagram, which you can feel free to check out at our Instagram. Our handle is BSD and then Yale. I'll also pull it up when I pull up this video, so you'll be able to see the handle there. I'm gonna just play this video as a quick little introduction.
I'm writing you a love poem because it is the only thing I'm capable of doing. All I've ever asked for the springtime is to bloom again, to remind me that we are beings worthy of resurrection. It is a truth universally acknowledged that love is a trying thing, and it is a truth universally contested that Black life matters. What I mean is that I am 21, you are 20-something, and Tiffany Washington is 22. What I mean is that we too have tucked our loving into the only corners of the night that will hold us. What I mean is that loving you is a difficult miracle. At the protest, I do not raise my hands and ask for mercy. How could I, when it's a pair of Black hands just like mine that kept me warm through the winter? I cannot bear recreating the violence of insisting my innocence. When we love, they name us insurgency. Call everything our bodies touch looting, including each other. I keep asking you for forever, because you and I have never been guaranteed tomorrow. So I text you after midnight, even though we haven't been talking. I say, I saw you at the protest and I'm drowning in the fact of my Blackness. I say, my poetry professor asked me once to try and find a line that will stick to the abyss, but the only thing that feels solid is the fact of your hand in mine. I say, come over, because I have to write a poem where we are not afraid. This is not the poem where I am not afraid, but this is the poem where I love you, where I hold your name inside my mouth, where I pronounce every letter. In the face of all this devastating catastrophe, I give you this, my language. I name you, my love, to be my fate. I cannot.
So that was a little background presentation and kind of just really the inspiration of our group at large. So the Black
I think we can hear you
Sorry
now.
You hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. Sorry about those technical difficulties, but yes. So BSDY, we were formed after the shooting of Stephanie Washington and Paul Witherspoon, which was done by a Yale police officer and a Hamden police officer in a residential area in New Haven. So New Haven is triply occupied by Yale, Hamden, and the New Haven police departments. And so there was a large scale protest that lasted for about 7+ hours. And so from that and from seeing the dedicated work and just due diligence of different community organizers, the BSDY we founded really in support of them and just trying to be dedicated to helping out their cause. The Black Students for Disarmament at Yale, we started as a group particularly centered around disarming the Yale Police Department. So in response to the shooting, we were hoping to be able to take away the Yale Police Department's weapons. But in response to all of the different things that happened over the last summer, as far as a lot of the different publicized incidents of police injustice and just racial injustice across the country, we moved to a more abolition-centric organization. And so right now our demands are that the Yale dismantles the YPD and then permanently halts all funding to police forces, instead using that money to support programs, initiatives, and organizations that actually keep the community safe, such as educational programs, after-school programs, and youth service programs. Just to give a little background on the Yale Police Department, it was founded in 1894, which makes it the oldest campus police force in the world. And the primary objective of the organization was to really set up a divide between the university and the New Haven community. As you can see by the quote, I won't read it, but if you feel inclined to, that was a quote by an early member of the Yale Police Department. And basically what this quote makes evident and kind of what the foundation does make evident is the fact that Yale intentionally set up this division and this dividing group that can really set up a big barrier between the New Haven community that is primarily Black and brown and the wealthy white privileged Yale students who inhabited the university then and continue to make their time and make their presence felt at the university today. Moving forward, just through some of the progression of the Yale Police Department, it has been instrumental to the suppression of different Black expression, as well as other marginalized groups in their expression and their work in fighting to obtain justice. The Yale Police Department gained a lot of traction and like really bolstered their troops, to, for lack of a better phrasing, during the 60s and 70s in response to a lot of different events and different social and racial justice uprising and movements that were going on across the country. You can see a couple of the things listed here as far as like different things that the Yale Police Department has done in order to suppress different expression and different protests. And so the way that our group works and like our group is centered on is coming from this tradition and realizing that the Yale Police Department has traditionally and historically just been set up as a group to really reinforce this divide and reinforce suppression of the New Haven community. And this is like the fact that all of these other events have happened is just more evidence of the fact that these, like the department hasn't been something that's uphold safety or uphold justice, but it's been a department that has simply uphold the protection of like Yale as an entity and the Yale property. And so that's why we're moving as a group looking towards to accomplish abolition. Some notable recent incidents were in 2015 when Taj Blow was held at gunpoint leaving the Sterling Memorial Library. It was claimed that he fit the description of a local robbery that was happening, but I mean, he was just a Black kid leaving the library from studying. And so I'll leave that to you to take those inferences and like take with that what you may. but that was like a big incident that got a lot of national publicized attention. And then also in 2019, the incident that I just referenced about Officer Terrence Pollock being involved in the shooting of Stephanie Washington and Paul Witherspoon. And I think the main point with that and the main idea is just the fact that a Yale cop was able to be and police over New Haven residents and wasn't just specifically on campus, because the area that it happened is very like different and separate and removed from where our general campus area is. But because of Yale's setup as a campus and institution that's ingrained within the downtown New Haven community, there's a lot of leeway and a lot of boundaries that are able to be pushed farther and farther, just because there's no specific set line where like this is the cutoff to campus and this is within campus and this is without. Because Yale, even just going past different policing incidents, Yale has been able to buy up a lot of property within the New Haven community and just like use that as an advantage, to where this can be a Yale building that is completely unrelated to campus activities, but since it's Yale owned, it can count as campus, and therefore the police department can extend their control over there. The way that the Yale Police Department is able to extend their control into the New Haven community and into these different areas is through a public act from the CT legislation. Basically, to summarize the act, it gives the New Haven police, or it gives Yale police officers all the rights and privileges and immunities that are also bestowed upon New Haven police officers. And so they have arresting power up to the state line. They're able to go and police these different areas and communities and just hold that authority and hold that ability to kind of just scrutinize and just monitor these people in different ways. And the big reason why that is such an issue is that there's a lot of authority, but there's no accountability. So the New Haven Police Department, not to say, and I'm not trying to make an argument right now, that the New Haven Police Department is more just than the Yale Police Department or that it deserves more backing. I'm just saying that they have monthly police commission meetings. There's been set up a civilian review board, although it has had difficulties like becoming in place and it's still not fully functional. There is a civilian review board that's supposed to be in place hypothetically that allows for community members to directly contribute to the thoughts and ideas that the New Haven Police Department has going on. But the Yale Police Department isn't under any of those rules or regulations. The Yale Police Department is privately owned, operated, and funded through Yale University. And so there's a lot that they're able to do without any direct community insight or oversight. And because of that as well, all of the different communications that the Yale Police Department has, they're all primarily centered around chatting with students and chatting with like faculty and staff and just Yale affiliates. Like there's no message that goes out unless they were interviewed by like the New Haven Register or some other local newspaper. There's no message that the Yale Police Department will send out that goes to a broader community outside of Yale. And so to us is just very flawed in the sense that there's no direct communication with the New Haven community at large. And yet there's a lot of ability to go out and police the New Haven community and have a large impact on the way that these communities function. These are some proposed YPD reforms that were done from 21CP. So 21st Century Policing is a group that started, and it was a task force that begun under Obama's administration. And they were focused around going to a lot of different areas where there were publicized incidents of police brutality, such as in Ferguson, for example. And so the Yale hired 21CP to come to Yale and analyze the police department and make suggestions for reform. And these are two reforms that they made. One was to basically help fund surrounding police departments, and the other was to increase training for the developmental needs of the university undergraduates. If you'd like to see a more in-depth and analysis of the 21CP report, and also just like going, because like as you can see, this is recommendation 5.18 and 5.31. So there are a lot of other ones besides these. And if you'd like to see a more in-depth analysis of both the full report at large as well as like kind of BSDY's response to it, I encourage you to check out our website, which I have a slide for at the end, and I can also like put it in the general chat. But the problem and issue with these reforms is that they entrench and expand the size and budget of the police departments. And so they don't actually do anything to help stop the issue at hand. It's been shown and proven that a lot of different things, such as like body cam footage and even the like no chokehold rule, there often it's hard to enforce that on an officer when they're out and in the moment doing something. And so it's been shown and proven that these small scale reforms don't actually do anything. And it's like putting a Band-Aid on an issue rather than addressing the root cause. And so our group and our like mission is to basically prove and assess the fact that you can't look to fix a system that is broken by just trying to cover up the cracks. You have to rethink how we conceptualize public safety and go back to just how we want to reform it. And like, since this is a faith conference, just like make an analogy to like Christianity, it's like when Jesus said you can't pour new wine into an old wine bag. Like you have to be able to get this new wine bag. You have to be able to make new adjustments and just completely rethink the way that we think about public safety and the way that we think about upholding one another and holding each other accountable. The big reasons why abolition is key is that the explicit function of the YPD is control, and the private university has no accountability. As I said before, there's been an extensive history of profiling, brutality, and also just hesitancy on the Yale side to be able to have open communication with the general New Haven community. There's been multiple instances where they've tried to block having releases of public complaints and things like that, just because they are a privately owned and operated entity. And so there's just a lot of leeway that allows for a lot of unjust policing to be set up. It can be difficult to imagine a world without police because our cultural mythologies are so bound up in this idea that without police, there's nothing to keep us safe. But we just don't feel as though that's true. And we feel as though if we are really looking to like stop crime and stop things of that nature, we should look to fund different programs that stop people before they're even able to commit crimes. So for me, I'm a firm believer in the fact that humans aren't naturally going to want to kill, lie, steal, and hurt one another. I believe that we were made in God's image and set up to love and care for one another, and that a lot of times the different crimes and things that come up are purely because of the fact of like circumstances and means to an end. And it's just people that are put in a bad situation. And so if we really want to stop crime and stop a lot of just the violence that's been going on, we need to look to address and provide kind of like equitable and resourced community efforts. This last quote is just, everything is impossible until it happens. It's by Nelson Mandela. And it's just the thought process that abolition is definitely a touchy subject. It's gotten a lot of attention, especially over the last year due to a lot of different protests that were going on in the summer of 2020 and everything like that. But it's not even very, to say a new concept. I shouldn't say that, because there have been people that have been fighting for that, such as Angela Davis, since the 60s and 70s. And so the idea and thought process behind that is that abolition is a step-by-step process. Like, we know that it's not fair to assume that the whole structure can be overturned in one day. But I think the biggest thing between reform and between abolition is the fact and idea that reform like is the end, versus like abolition uses reform as a means to an end of eventually leading to the thought and idea that police departments at large don't want to serve a function if the right reforms are continuously put in and built upon. And so the idea behind everything is impossible until it happens is a really challenge. Anybody that is like questioning the idea to just use their imagination and use their ability to kind of explore that thought process and idea of abolition and what that would mean, and how, because abolition doesn't mean anarchy, it doesn't mean lawlessness, it just means caring for community and focusing on restorative and transformative justice rather than the punitary measures that we currently have in place. If you'd like to learn more about our group, please feel free to check out our website. It's defundYPD.com. On there, there's a lot of different resources and things that we've been able to compile and work on over the last, I guess, going on 2 years now. And yeah, I think that'll conclude my presentation. I appreciate the time, and I'll throw it back to Professor Nixon.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jalen. We appreciate you sharing with us, and we're excited to hear more from you a little bit later as we dive into some questions. So thank you so much for talking to us about the powerful work that you all are doing. I love that last quote by Mandela: "Nothing is impossible until it happens." That's so poignant and inspiring. So thank you so much for that reminder. We're going to move next to our next presenter, and her name is Tanya Regley. Most recently, Tanya has worked at Holy Redeemer Health System to develop new initiatives addressing the opioid crisis and services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. She holds a BA from Georgetown University and a master's in social service and a master's in law and social policy from Bryn Mawr Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research. She is currently pursuing a master's in divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary. Welcome, Tanya. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Professor Nixon. A little bit more about myself. I have spent the last 33 years doing community organizing, mostly in that Latinx rights and later in disability rights. I'm originally from Venezuela. I am going to share my, okay, I'm good to go. Thank you. Sorry, I'm having trouble finding my, there we go. All right, so I'm focusing specifically on people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities in the criminal justice system. So what are intellectual and developmental disabilities? We generally know them as things like autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. They're disorders that are identified during birth or childhood, and they impact different things for different people developmentally. It might impact speech, communication, physical movement. Those are just some of the things. So people with, I'm gonna short it to IDD, intellectual and developmental disabilities, represent about 2 to 3% of the population, but in the criminal justice system, the data that we have, they represent about 10%. It's probably higher, and the rates for people with autism is also higher. What happens is when people have disabilities that are hidden, not physically obvious to the person, we have less understanding in our systems, and especially in our criminal justice system of the issues, very much like mental health also as a disability. So I've been part of gathering a panel of people for advising the Attorney General in our state. I live in Pennsylvania, in the United States, to identify what some of the issues have been and how to address the high rate of people with developmental disabilities in the criminal justice system. So really basic stuff. We do not in Pennsylvania and in most states in the United States have tracking of people with developmental disabilities such as autism. There are no materials that are included when they encounter the criminal justice system. And so there are very few interventions that are done. There's also very little data because there's no tracking, there's no initial information being taken in. We don't really know how many people. We just know that many people in the criminal justice system and in mass incarceration have different kinds of disabilities, oftentimes can't read, oftentimes have other barriers. And there's very few to no policies as a result, and there's a need for an oversight structure. So that's what we found so far for Pennsylvania. So some of the places that our group identified, and the group consisted mostly of people with developmental disabilities. I was gathering people from across Pennsylvania who were working on disability rights issues already, and also already in the prison systems, identifying people and working to get them the resources they needed, and also working with people who had come in contact with the police, and who usually a family member had reached out and they were trying to get them out of jail or prison, or just get them some representation. To give you an example, one young woman, 22 years old, autism, nonverbal with seizure disorder. A parent contacted one of the advocates because while they had taken her into the emergency room because she had been hitting her head until the point where it was bleeding, while she was there, she had a seizure. She started to flail around and hit one of the nurses. And the nurse pressed charges, and the 22-year-old was in the local jail and did not have seizure medication or any kind of help, and was not able to speak. And that took place for about 7 days before the advocate was able to finally get her out and back home and start working on other ways to address the issue. Eventually, the charges were dropped. That's just a little bit of an example of what can happen. I have a 22-year-old son with autism, and for many people with developmental disabilities, there will be, and often is, encounters with police and with the criminal justice system. In what we've been looking at as a team is whether it's possible to get records of people who are incarcerated through the Department of Education, because they had certain rights if they were identified and got services in schools. And because prison systems are supposed to be providing follow-up educational services, it's one way we could potentially find people, because right now it's very hard to figure out who's there. The big drawback with that one is it takes resources as a family to get special education services in the United States. And so communities, especially communities of color and low income families as well, have a harder time accessing special education. And the people who end up incarcerated are mostly Black and brown bodies, and the most of the people who are able to get the resources to protect their children are the white community and the wealthier community. So those resources, those records would be somewhat limited in that regard. The other thing that happens is there's a lot of misdiagnosis. So someone might be diagnosed with having a mental health disorder when actually what they have is autism, and it's very different and presents very differently. So the other question we asked is, can existing diversionary programs be leveraged? So we have, fortunately in Pennsylvania, it's not perfect, but we do have diversionary programs for people with mental health disorders. Is it possible that we could do a parallel program that would help us be able to create diversionary programs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities? So what tracking systems will enable criminal justice systems to identify people with IDD when exposed to the system? So this is a big one. What do we already have in place, and what needs to be put in place? And that is a question that has created some maps and charts, and we are still very much working on that, on all of these questions, but it is at least a beginning, because this is really an invisible population. I put here, I asked Dustin if I could share with you his website and a little information about him. This is from his website. So Dustin is one of the advocates that's been on the team. He has a website, and he's specifically in Pittsburgh, so a lot of it has to do with Pittsburgh. I point you to this because it is very hard to find resources at a deeper level that also focus on the tremendous intersectionality between disabilities, Black and brown bodies, and poverty. And Dustin Gibson is one of the few people that I've seen really capture that in his resources. And I wanted to share that with you. In many ways, what I'm talking about, we need to hear the voices of people with developmental disabilities. I'm a firm believer of that. Previously, I'm going to stop this. So I previously was the executive director of the ARC of Philadelphia, which is a disability rights organization started in 1948 by parents of children with intellectual disabilities primarily, at a time when most children were put directly into institutions. We have worked a long time to close our institutions, but other kinds of institutions have formed, and one of them, where people end up, is the prison system. So the good thing is we're finally starting to have conversations about this issue and about the need to have tracking, advocacy, and alternatives, training for our police, although we don't want to spend our entire time training police. We need to train the systems as a whole, and we have to have options. I would say that even within the social work community, for example, there's a really lack of training, of understanding of developmental disabilities, and of really advocating with people with developmental disabilities for their rights. As I said, developmental disabilities, autism, for example, impact communities across the spectrum. Doesn't matter what race, ethnicity, economics, it doesn't discriminate. And yet you would never know that in terms of who ends up in in the more congregate care settings and in prisons. And so we have a lot of work to do on the intersectionality between developmental disabilities and disabilities as a whole, and the prison systems, criminal justice systems. So I'm just gonna turn it back over to the next person, Professor Nixon.
Yes, sure. Great. Thank you so much, Tanya, for your presentation and for that valuable information. And we'll look forward to dialoguing with you a bit more as we get into some of our questions. And so just a quick reminder before I introduce our next presenter, please, if you're on the Zoom webinar, use the Q&A function to submit questions because we want to get to those for the second part of our conversation. And if you're watching on YouTube, I believe you can place some questions in the comments, and we're tracking there as well. So please feel free to do that. I see that we've already had a couple of submissions, and we will get to that after our next presentation. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our final presenter, and that is none other than Eunice Park. Eunice is a sophomore at Yale studying statistics and data science. Currently, Eunice serves as a board member of Yale Undergraduate Prison Project. Their work includes working with formerly and currently incarcerated individuals and their families in their pursuit of educational, personal, and expressive goals, contributing to social justice in Connecticut and beyond, and initiating dialogue surrounding mass incarceration within the Yale community. Eunice, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for everyone else who's presented and for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project. So I will share my screen for a presentation right now. So I'm one of the 3 co-presidents of the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project. And we strongly believe in this one quote by Ryan Stevenson, who is the director of the Equal Justice Initiative, who says that we are all implicated when we allow for other people to be mistreated. An absence of compassion can corrupt the decency of a community, a state, and a nation. Fear and anger can make us vindictive and abusive, unfair and unjust, until we all suffer from the absence of the mercy and we condemn ourselves as much as we victimize others. The closer we get to mass incarceration and extreme levels of punishment, the more I believe it's necessary to recognize that we all need mercy, we all need justice, and perhaps we all need some measure of unmerited grace. So if you look at this graph, we could see that not only is the topics of criminal justice more so spotlighted today, but in fact that the prison population over time has exponentially grown. And when we look at the second graph here, we could see that when we compare Connecticut to other countries even, Connecticut leads in incarceration rates, despite being like a smaller region, even more than the UK, even more than Portugal, even more than Canada. And when we compare these statistics with different statistics in regards to how violent crime is actually decreasing, there exists a great disparity in why, even if violent crime is decreasing, even if the rate of crime in many areas are decreasing, why is it that the prison population is going up? Why is it that the answer to every single problem that we see in society is locking someone up? So we believe that the discrimination and dehumanization driving the US justice system is a product of white supremacy and structural racism. And our mission is to challenge inequities of mass incarceration through service and advocacy while learning from and supporting others who share that vision. And one thing I would like to stress is that while we're doing all this work, we really thrive as an organization based on our community partners. So that's through other student organizations at Yale, including the people who have spoken today. That's through other grassroots activism organizations in the Connecticut community. Because we also recognize that as Yale students or as students who have a very particular way of seeing the world and have various amounts of privilege that other people don't have, it's not necessarily our job to dictate what other people should learn or should do, but rather we want to be there in the best way we can to support others. So the history of the Yale Prison Project is that we were founded in 2009 as a criminal justice reading group for Yale students to talk about mass incarceration, increase the dialogue of those issues on campus. And shortly after the reading group was started, we wanted to do more action. So we partnered with the Manson Prison Education Initiative, which is an undergraduate organization that provides educational opportunities for young men in Manson Youth Correctional Facility, particularly for GED preparation. So over these past decade or so, the Yale Undergraduate Prison Project has expanded to become an umbrella organization that encompasses prison activism, advocacy, and reform efforts among the Yale student body. So YUP has 3 different pillars. The first pillar is advocacy, the second pillar is education, and the third pillar are other organizations or other types of initiatives we do to supplement those 2 pillars. In regards to the first pillar of advocacy, that's our largest student body group. We have around 100 or so members that all participate in various campaigns. For example, they're fighting for free phone calls in Connecticut, fighting for a police accountability task force, supporting a campaign to end solitary confinement in Connecticut. And all these different advocacy organizations have a partner grassroots organization on ground in Connecticut that are helping them support their efforts and see what we could best do to help them as well. And their second pillar is education. And these are through like the Manson prison that we work with, but also most recently, we're excited to be working with York Prison, which is the only female correctional facility in Connecticut. And we focus on providing GED preparation as well as a post-GED current events type of element, where in the post-GED seminar, I was actually fortunate to be a part of it last year in my first year. And that's when we allowed there to be an open discussion on basically any topic that these people were interested in and that we were interested in as well. And that engineered a lot of interesting conversations, such as I remember one lesson plan was on the topic of emotions, another one was on facial recognition technology. And in all our programs, we try to make sure that everything is very personalized. We typically pair up with a person who's incarcerated, or which has been a lot more difficult because of COVID and because everything has to be moved to a virtual capacity. But it's been one of my most fulfilling things at Yale. And other than advocacy and education, we also have a weekly newsletter. We have a speaker and events program that rotates, in which we invite different speakers to come in and talk about what work they're doing. For example, just yesterday, we had an event with Art Vision, where they spotlighted different art projects from people who were incarcerated, and they got to talk about that, and we got to have an amazing conversation that way. And generally, we try to be very open to any events and any collaborations that people have that could be useful or could be helpful, and could also just help us as an organization learn more and about our stance on advocacy, prison abolition, and criminal justice reform as well. So these are our links to our pages. This is our Instagram account where we post updates and have updates on events. And this is a link to our website that has more detailed information about our projects. And thank you so much for the chance to speak. And I look forward to the panel discussion part of this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eunice, for your presentation and letting us know about the great work that you all are doing. At this time, I'd like to invite our other 2 panelists, Jalen and Tanya, onto the screen. And before we dive into some questions from the audience, I've actually been taking some notes myself, and I'd love to just ask you each a quick question before we transition. And so my first question is for you, Jalen. And again, thank you so much for telling us about the great work that BSDY is doing. And so my question for you is, how have your activities been received by the broader Yale community in general and the Yale Police Department in particular? And maybe in connection with that, what do you and other BSDY members see as having been some of the cost of your work? Because and maybe I don't want to answer the question for you, but I'm just guessing that, you know, talking about abolishing the campus police department has not been received with extremely open arms. And so has there been any retaliation to that? What has been the pushback, or what, I guess, conversations have been spurred as far as the reception of that message?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you everybody else for your presentations as well. I would say as far as the reception of the message, it's definitely been mixed in a sense. I would say that especially given the fact that like we specifically transitioned towards more of an abolitionist group in like the wake of all of the shootings and things going on in the past summer, I think there's been a mixed response. I think there's definitely been a message and a tone of like, we hear you, but I don't necessarily think if that's been a tone of like we're going to act upon that in a sense, or if I think there's a lot of, because like Yale is able to hire, like for example 21st century policing, and even like a professor at the Yale Law School, Tracy Mears, she's like the head of, or one of, she was served on the board of directors for the 21st century policing. And so Yale has a lot of professionals and a lot of known scholars, and so it's hard for us as undergraduate students to come with our thoughts and ideas. And then even talking with community members, there's just like a certain level of, I guess, like clout or like a certain level of status that people have, that where it's a little bit less likely that they'll listen to us. So it's been mixed results. I would say there's been a lot of open conversations. I would say as far as like direct opposition, I've heard, and like there's been conversation that, and I see like questions in the chat as well that I think are like valid questions and valid things to bring up. I think the most difficult thing for us as far as like in organizing on campus is that it's never really been a conglomerate or like a counter group to ours, in a sense. Like the same way that we're fighting for the abolition of the Yale Police Department, there hasn't been another group that's been fighting for to keep the Yale Police Department. There hasn't been another group that's been like the Yale Police Department needs to say. And so it's hard for us to like gauge the full breadth of the idea, because I think a lot of people who are against it are less likely to speak out right now, just because of all of the different things, and like kind of, I guess, drawing the analogy or parallel to like people that didn't want to say that they voted for Trump or something like that. Like there's this idea that the large community is thinking, and also just like the fact that Yale is a known like very liberal arts like type education, and that is like a lot of liberal people at the campus. Is like you don't want to be ostracized as a community member for saying something that's different. But in my opinion, like I just want to have open conversations, because at the end of the day, like public safety and public health is the main goal. And so like however we can work to get towards that, and then as community building a way as possible, is like what I want to look to accomplish. So I would say there's been good and bad as far as the response, and we're really working to right now, especially like we're looking to do a lot of just general broad outreach. But I would say like from non-Yale groups and non-Yale entities, I've only ever heard positive from it, which I think shows a sign of like the differing opinions and viewpoints of like Yale and both students as well as like faculty and like administration and the New Haven community, because there's been, I think, a lot more vocal outcry. And like I said, like BSDY isn't the first group that has gone and protested against some of the actions of the Yale Police Department. There's been a lot of work by community activists within the community for years and years and years beforehand. And so just like building on that, I think is the idea that I think it's an idea that people think is new, but it's not actually as new as people argue it to be. And it's also like growing in its support and growing in the ways that we can look to implement it. So now I think it's looking to address those structural and traditional, like, I guess, elite kind of views on the situation at large, and trying to find a way where we can meet and like have open discussions.
No, awesome. No, thank you so much for sharing it. And I think, you know, what your work represents is a willingness to say, you know, we're going to put something on the table. And so to your point, you know, sometimes it can be, you know, maybe easy to poke holes in something or to say, well, that's not going to work. But, you know, the reality is what's been happening thus far hasn't worked. And so we're trying to work towards a better solution. And so I know there's some audience questions that want to tease this out a bit more, and we'll get to that in a second. One of the ones that popped out, I think, were around, there's sort of these different ideals around defunding and abolishing and that sort of a thing. And so we'll get to that in a little while, because that'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that. I want to move to you for a second, Tanya. just to ask a quick question, and thank you as well for your presentation. And maybe this is sort of my background as an attorney coming out, but as I was listening to your presentation, I was really struck by wondering what you've shared means for, in particular, defense attorneys, and what does it mean to provide an effective and informed defense for a client like you're talking about with an IDD who is moving through the criminal justice system. And so I guess the question that I have for you is, number one, what are some potential maybe deficiencies that litigants or defense attorneys in particular, and I'm sure even public defenders may have in that prevents them from providing an effective and informed defense of a client with an IDD, and what could be some core competencies or some suggestions that you may have that would push them in a better and more effective direction as we try to seek to have more advocates in the system who understand what's needed when someone has an IDD.
Well, I think one of the big issues is to keep it even from getting to that point. And also I've trained many a special ed lawyer, and we know that that's not something people are taught when they're in law school. It's not also common to have as much advocacy in the disability world that there was before, because a lot of that funding has disappeared. So once you get around those things, really it's a lack of diagnosis or a lack of understanding of what that diagnosis means. And there are plenty of experts. We have tons and tons of data and information that could support the defense of someone with an intellectual and developmental disability. But we also have a lot of people who don't have access to that defense, right? That level of defense. And I think what I was trying to say earlier was that it's because of systemic racism and the way things are set up in the United States, and really in a lot of places, but especially in the US right now, it's primarily the white community or the wealthy communities that access that kind of defense. So it's absolutely possible to bring up developmental disability to help get the person the services they need rather than just put them into jail. But I've been working for many years with the advocacy systems in Philadelphia, for example, on the school to prison pipeline. And I worked at a high school in Philadelphia for a number of years. And just as an example, the average reading level for the whole high school, 1,600 students, was 5th grade. Most of the students, I had a caseload of 400 students who were identified as having developmental disabilities. And of those students, the majority of them had never learned to read. It's not that they couldn't have learned to read. They were never given the opportunities and supports to read. When you graduate from high school, if you manage to somehow get there, what are your options afterwards, work-wise, if you can't read? So my job was to get as many students into jobs as possible. And that's probably one of the biggest barriers. So one of the things we really have to do is is deal with a lot of the institutional racism that's already in our schools that then leads the kids as adults to become unable to make a living and survive, and without maybe getting into things that are not legal. And I think most lawyers can use those kinds of defense strategies to try to answer your point. I don't even know if I really addressed it. To defend people in the system.
No, great. No, thank you so much for sharing some of that background that you have and your immense experience. I have to ask you a quick follow-up question. You know, your bio struck me. You're pursuing a master's in divinity at PTS right now, and I actually, before coming to do this work here, I lived in Plainsboro, well, Princeton for a little bit, but then I realized that I liked my bank account, so I moved over to Plainsboro because it's a little cheaper. I attended actually the church, the Princeton SDH, not far from your campus, pursuing an MDiv at PTS that used to attend. And so my question is for you is, in light of the work that you're doing, how do you your pursuit of your MDiv intersecting with that work? And what are some ways that you see a connection between the pursuit of your MDiv degree and this work that you've been talking about?
So one of the things about doing community organizing for 33 years is the only thing that gets you through without being eaten alive by the anger in the systems that, you know, I'm glad we're talking about it now, but this is not a new thing. Nothing we're talking about is new. And I'm old, so I've been watching it for a long time. And I just realized the only way I could survive was if it was from a faith-based perspective, from a perspective of love. I got to the point where I also realized the only way to truly be inclusive is through my faith. So I'm in the discernment process for holy orders in the Episcopal Church. And for me, I think you look at Beloved Community and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, and, you know, I'm not from the US, so I learned a lot about this when I came for university. That's what needs to drive us. I'm very involved with an organization in Philadelphia, also worth looking at, called Power. And it is led by African American churches and their pastors, but it's interfaith, and it's throughout the Philadelphia area. And we've been working on congregational support from many different faith communities around Black Lives Matter, around the school to prison pipeline, all those different things. So for me, that's what led me there, because I found that in the secular world, trying to get the work done is much harder. I'm not saying it's easy. In a faith-based world, we still have lots of white supremacy and discrimination and issues, but at the very least, we're starting at that base of God's love. So thank you for asking me that question.
Absolutely. I love your response. Thank you so much for sharing. So Eunice, I have a quick question for you, and thank you as well for your presentation. One of the things I wanted to ask you is maybe how much, and I'm sure you all have considered it, you've talked about a lot about the powerful work that you all are doing with formerly incarcerated individuals in preparing them to re-enter society. And so one of the things that I'd like to ask you is sort of on the other end of that, how do we advocate for the creation of a broader society that is more welcoming to formerly incarcerated individuals and that is more intentional about creating opportunities for them to reintegrate back into society and sort of get their life back on the right foot and that sort of a thing?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I think it's definitely something that I've been considering as well because to be completely honest, like before abolition became a very more so popular word, I hadn't really considered it or educated myself on it before. But now that I'm hoping to read more and educate myself more on it, I realize how important it is to recognize how entrenched the criminal justice system is to every single structure in this country, whether that be from starting early, from disparities in schools and resources, or just so education. It's clear that there not only needs to be a reactive measure, but also a preventative measure as well. And that just includes what basically like every human being deserves basic dignity and basic equal access to resources. And that should happen through making sure that like our schools are equally funded. We practice like safe resources and safe support for people who are young as well. But in this process, we also need to make sure that there's a lot of people that are exiting and coming back into prison and exiting prison again. And we need to make sure that there's support systems out there for them. So for example, one thing that, the Yale Prison Project has been really adamant about is this campaign to get rid of the campaign for the Justice Impact Movement, where people could get rid of a box that says like, have I been convicted of some misdemeanor or felony in their application, and that takes them away from a lot of different opportunities, whether that be in education or jobs. Because I think it is, if you think about it, like it does not make sense in which you go to a judge and they judge you that they need to go to prison for X amount of years. It doesn't make sense that that should be a life sentence that you carry your entire life, no matter what happened. And we want to make sure that we practice that combination of proactive and reactive measures to advocate for that.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. At this time, I'm going to invite my colleague Renee onto the screen to ask your questions. And Renee is a third-year divinity student at Yale Divinity School. Thank you, Renee, for walking us through the audience questions.
Thank you very much for all this engaging talk, and please keep the question coming in the Q&A function. The first question is directed to Jalen, and I can combine them because they are kind of interrelated questions. And alternative programs like education and youth programs are long-term goals. However, there has to be an option that people can call on in the emergency situations. So audience questions is defunding or abolishing the police a feasible goal? And also, what's the alternative for YPD as a security force?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate it. I think first going to the fact of defunding and abolishing, like I said in my presentation, I think we recognize the fact that it couldn't be done immediately in a sense. And so doing like it's a longitudinal scale. And like I said, like there's been people fighting for abolition that have made small scale gains way before I was even born. And so I appreciate those people, and I like acknowledge that and acknowledge that we're still just like working towards that path. I think addressing the idea of, I guess first addressing the idea that police stop these violent crimes and things like that. I think for me, I guess I'll speak specifically for the YPD at first, like we have a report coming up actually in collaboration with YUP, and it should be coming out pretty soon. But basically, for example, there's a statistic that like between 2015 and 2019, only about 65% of YPD calls were in regards to community assistance. So that's checking to see if someone is driving with like a suspended license. That's checking for disorderly conduct. That's family offenses, nonviolent. That's intimidation and threatening, but there's no like violence or anything going on. And so I think with all of those things considered, I think a good, I guess, response to that is the fact that we can implement a differential response system. And that's part of our plan within funding the New Haven community as well, is like implementing differential response systems. Like, for example, a percentage of YPD calls are just to go and address medical situations. A police officer doesn't have to address a medical situation. And so thinking of different ways that we can look to make the police not necessary for things that aren't necessary in that way, I think is a easy first transitional step. And then also going towards the idea of violence. I think one, yeah, like you said, or like the question said, addressing those issues is like a long-term thing, but we have to start somewhere and we have to begin somewhere. And if we don't look to address them now, then we're just going to continue to fall into these cycles of things like that. And then I also challenge the idea that having a police force present like prevents these crimes. I think policing in a sense is naturally a response organization, and the fact that something has to happen in order for the police to come and like address that situation. And so I think that going along with that idea, there's not really much prevention going on. And even going to the idea of like the criminal justice system, like people, there's a large percentage of people that go into the system, come out, and then go right back in because they're not actually rehabilitated. So I think abolition at large is actually thinking to just completely destruct the system that we have right now and really work towards a more transformative and restorative justice model, and just look to actually provide people with kind of like that healing and development that isn't there. And then I guess my last point, just like for YPD specifically, is like the go and just continue on this idea that the police force is necessary to like address crimes. Between 2011 and 2018, the Yale police had a clearance rate of 8%, which means like a clearance rate is the amount of cases closed. And so first and foremost, they're addressing a lot of calls that aren't violent. Only around like 5% or no 2% of calls are related to anything like violence related, and that is not even necessarily to say violence was done. It's just like violence related. Only around 2% of those calls were related to that. A large majority of those calls are community assistance, and over like 30% of them are like treasury things. So that's the Yale PD transporting checks and transporting funds and things like that. I don't think there needs to be like a weaponized police force that's doing those things. And so the idea that having a police force inherently means that crimes are going to be stopped and solved, I think is kind of like a flawed notion in a sense, just based on the statistics that I've been able to see.
Thank you very much. The second question from the audience is directed to Eunice. The question the audience asks, how to destigmatize conversations around incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals? Because like even like incarceration rate does not really correspond to like public safety. But there still has been a lot of politicization around this issue.
Yeah, I think that that comes through both legislative ways, such as getting rid of like particular demarcators for people who are formerly incarcerated and have already served their time. And it also just comes through more community education and resources, tying into what BSDY is doing about defunding the police and abolishing the Yale police. But all those things and all those conversations help people rethink how we've previously thought about public safety, in which like it's not so much a direct correlation between an increase in police and the increase in incarceration leading to public safety. And I think that also the last point I would like to make is that while we were participating in the educational component and going into Manson or York, what was really striking for me was also just recognizing that it's so easy for us to get into our head sometimes that we think about what the right thing should be to say, or how should I phrase this, or we're so like caught up in our heads of like how we're presenting ourselves that we often don't know that maybe just the right simple thing is to just ask, like, what do you want to talk about, or what do you want to learn about? And just honestly treat people as a way they should be respected. And while all of this is going on, still be cognizant of like our specific places in society and how we could try to unpack some of those injustices.
Thank you very much. The third question is directed to all the panelists. One audience asked, and how should we disentangle in the need for public safety from racism? Because despite, like police has like a really long history of like racism and also policing against LGBT people, there still needs to be an institution that maintains public safety. So what's the alternative?
Or Tanya, do you want to go ahead since you haven't answered the question yet?
because it's such an easy question to answer, right?
Oh no, give space.
We're talking about fundamental cultural shifts that have been worked on for a long time already. Hopefully we're being given a new time. Maybe God sent us to our rooms with the pandemic to think about this. To renew that transformation. There is no magic, it's a struggle. It's going to be all of us, and especially the white community, the white church, that has to look at itself and understand its role. It's the only way we're going to change what's happening with our police force. It's also, there's some tremendous books out there just on how our police forces got so militarized, how all these resources went to the police force. Police force that we have now performs a very different function than it used to. And as a social worker, I would say that the police force is often asked to do things that have nothing to do with policing. I'll give you an example. One that should be fairly straightforward to address, remarkably, would be, okay, I'm at my high school. I have a young person who's completely melting down and we don't know what to do. So we 302, that's what we call it. We call the police. They have someone from, they come and they basically take that person away, and they eventually get put in a mental health facility. It's not all that different than being put in prison, unfortunately. But the first group you call are the police for that intervention. And it doesn't need to be that. So that's just about retraining schools, retraining and coming up with how you actually want to address this in a way that will actually help that student who maybe has schizophrenia, still figuring out how to control it, and needs some very specific interventions. And there needs to be plans, and there needs to be all sorts of, alternative interventions for that person, so that they don't end up being in a segregated setting, and then after they're adults, just ending up being put into jail, which it all connects, right? So that's just one example I can think of, but let me turn it over to Jalen and Eunice.
Yeah, I would agree with what Tanya was saying. I think, and even going to, I think another question in the chat was about white supremacy. I think that's it's a tag word or a trigger word, but like in my opinion, I don't think it needs to be so. Like, I think it's a word to use to describe things that have gone on historically within our country and across the world. And it's like, I think to shy away from words like that is to shy away from our history and to shy away from truly looking to address the issues that have caused a lot of these deep-rooted systems that Tanya was just mentioning, about just the ways that injustice happens and the ways that people are discriminated against and things like that. And so that's why, like, for me, I think that looking to do more holistic change and do more things just related to the idea at large of looking to change the way that people just conceptualize public safety and conceptualize the way that people work together, I think is essential. And so just looking to kind of take a small step back in a sense and try to have a more holistic view of things rather than like focusing on the system that we already have in place, because I think that looking to reform the systems that we already have in place inherently like discriminates, because those systems were already set up. Like the police force was set up as a service to catch slaves, as it's like, and if that's the basis and foundation of the organization, its continued development in some way, shape, or form is going to continue to be rooted in those ideals that it was set up with as its like main objective purpose. And so I think looking to work towards addressing those things is kind of the first necessary step that we need to take, as well as just considering all of the other things that Tanya was saying, as far as looking for differential responses and looking to holistically care for communities on a wide variety of levels.
Echoing what everyone else has been saying, also just recognizing how it's not like a instant effort and an instant upheaval that we're calling for that's going to just happen by just implementing a policy. It takes what everyone was saying of a mindset shift and a really strong reckoning of our own internal biases of like what we consider what a prisoner should look like or what an inmate should look like, or even what we consider the role of the police to be. And having all of that in mind, making sure that I'm not sure if this is like YUP's Yale Prison Project's opinion, but this is just my personal opinion. But I feel like too long people have been asking groups to tone down their language, and also just for them to wait a little bit longer for the next perfect strategy moment to come. And there is no perfect time to advocate for things that you should have had already. And only when you keep on continuing to temper your language, it doesn't actually get to the root of the issue. So when organizations like YUP use the word white supremacy, we're not intending to incite division, but we're just intending to make sure that we call it what it is. And of course, when we're talking to like prison officials, we don't call ourselves a prison abolition organization. We don't refer to ourselves as trying to dismantle white supremacy. But when we're talking to the Yale community or to people at general people at audiences and conferences, we want to be transparent about what the issue is.
Thank you very much. The last question is also open to the panelists. Is regarding the issue of generational divide. Many of the conversations regarding police reform are concentrated on younger generations. And how can we better engage our community members from the older generation who traditionally do not favor this type of issues?
In my opinion, I think it's the idea of looking to form relationships and looking to form community first. And I think creating an open dialogue and also an open information platform so that people can be coming to the issue from the same background or same experience. I think there's a lot of, not to say misinformation, but just like lack of distribution of information. And so some people know certain things, other people know other things. And so I think there's a large divide and there's not a lot of overlap and intersection with like the different ideas that people are able to express. And even I think going to another question in the chat that was related to like LGBTQ plus ideas and like the idea that dealing with those issues individually rather than intersectionally is better. And I think, like, at least for me individually, I think that we have to address all of those issues together. Like Christ said, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the Jesus Christ, like his mission and his purpose in life. And so I think with that, like the idea that we can isolate, and exactly like what Eunice was saying, like isolating groups and kind of like destructing people to like their individual identities rather than looking at them holistically. I think that's like the main, I would say, disruption in communication between like younger generations and older generations. And so I think by providing open dialogue and also like just more access to information and community, and also just being understanding of people. I think a lot of times when people come to disagreements, it's a lot of, if you don't fully agree with me, like we can't talk or we can't relate at all. And I just push back against that in the sense that I think we can have disagreements, but still work together to go towards an accomplished goal. Because I firmly believe that like everybody would like to have a just, equal, safe, fair, like all those positive things. I think everyone wants that in the world, and everybody just sees that from a different lens. But if we can work together to do that, and I think the only way we can work together to accomplish that is by like forming genuine relationships and understanding that although our opinions may differ, our goal is the same. And how can we work to like rectify those things to accomplish that shared goal?
Okay, well, I guess we will leave it there. Thank you so much, Renee, for walking us through the questions from the audience. I'd like to thank again Jalen, Tanya, and Eunice for being with us and for making their powerful presentations. One of the last things that I'll share is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Dr. Cornel West, who of course is a Harvard professor, and he says that justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. And I believe that you three, Jalen, Eunice, and Tanya, are evidence of the fact that when you step out in faith and put feet to your faith, as another preacher says, that justice and the love of God can be shown through that work. And so we thank you for that work. We encourage you all to support their work and to get involved. And they all shared their websites and social media. And so please do that to the extent that you are able. And we look forward to all of the great work that you all do in the future. Without further ado, I will turn things back over to Stephen to give us instructions for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for such an engaging panel. It was amazing. I so appreciate all of the work that you are doing. Thank you, Professor Nixon, for your deft leadership of the panel. Thank you, Renee, for volunteering to help out with the audience questions. And thank you to Jalen, Eunice, and Tanya for just such amazing work that you're doing. Not just the presentations you gave today, but the work that you're doing on a daily basis. We really appreciate it. It is 11:30 now, Eastern Time, and we are excited for what's coming next. Before I get into that, I want to also thank the Atlantic Union Youth Ministries Department for sponsoring this session of our program. Also want to thank the translators as well for their amazing work in keeping up and sharing this content into Portuguese and Spanish as well. This concludes our second to last presentation. So we'll have a 15-minute break before coming back at 11:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to have a vote of thanks period where Mpilo, myself, and other leadership will just come together to express our appreciation for all of the people that have put in so much work to make this conference a reality. We also are going to use that time to share more resources with you. So if you are interested in this conference and interested in having an impact beyond this conference, then I would really invite you to attend that as well and just stay up to date on what will be happening moving forward. We have some exciting announcements during that period as well. And then our final session will lead right into that at 12:15 with Claudia M. Allen to give our final charge. You will not want to miss that. The link will be the same, so just stay in this meeting, go off for 15 minutes, do what you need to do, and we will come back and see you soon. Also, don't forget to follow us on @Yale ACF on Instagram, just to stay connected after this is over. We would love to get to know you all better. Thank you. See you in a few minutes. And it's a timer right here.
You need to stop the screen share.
Yeah.
And we are back. All right. Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to thank you again for sticking with us throughout this entire program. We're glad that you have been enjoying it just as much as we are. And we are so excited for our final presentation given to us by Claudia M. Allen. Let me tell you, she is a dynamic speaker. You just listen to her for 30 seconds and you're already hooked. So you'll get a little taste of that in just a moment. But before we move into our final presentation for this weekend, we just wanted to take a moment to thank every individual who has made this a possibility. Many of you may not know our organizing team is actually very, very small. It's myself, Steve, who you've seen, and Guillermo, who you've seen in a variety of facets, either translating, running a panel, or just introducing himself and organizing in some other fashion. But God has been so good, and He has blessed us in such a tremendous way to network us with a myriad of individuals to guide our thinking, to help us with organizing, to help us with logistics, to help us with technology, to help us with fundraising, so many other things. And I'm sure even if we go over an hour describing everyone that has helped us, we still won't be able to touch on every single person who's made this a possibility. So what we're going to do now is just take 30 minutes to touch on some key people who have been very helpful, give some of them an opportunity to share a little bit more about themselves. And we're also going to give you some resources that will be useful going forward as it relates to dealing work in social justice. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Guillermo de Souza, who is going to introduce our translators and give us a few moments to talk about them and the work that they've done. So Guillermo.
Guillermo, we can't hear you. Sorry, I think you might be an interpreter, Guillermo. Let's change that.
Let me just turn off interpretation. All right, I think we're good. Apologies for the difficulties.
Sorry for these technical issues. Okay, there we go, Guillermo. You were in. Sorry about that.
Thank you. And we apologize for those technical difficulties, and thank you for staying on with us. Greetings and good morning if you're watching us from Eastern Standard Time. Let My People Go, an interfaith conference on religious freedom and mass incarceration, has been a global, worldwide online event. This event could not have been possible without your participation. And especially this event could not have had been possible without the support, the dedication, and the intense work and voluntary spirit of our translators. Our conference has been translated into English, Spanish, Portuguese, and yesterday into American Sign Language. None of this could have been possible without you translators. And especially today, I would like to thank for our Portuguese translators, Professor Milton Torres of UNASP, that is the Seventh-day Adventist University of the state of São Paulo, Brazil. And I would also like to thank Pastor and Professor Efraim Velasquez Dean of the Seminaries of the Inter-American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. And as a sign of appreciation, we would like to devote this lot to introduce you to our attendees, to get to know you a little bit more. I will now pass the word to Yuri Guimarães Marques,
Para o pastor Yuri Guimarães,
who will be speaking on behalf of our Portuguese translators, since Professor Milton, unfortunately, has had another meeting that he had to attend to. All that said, we want to extend to you, our translators, muchas gracias y muito obrigado. Thank you so much. Yuri, take it away.
Thank you, Guilherme. So they asked me to introduce us somehow, though Guilherme has already done that. UNASP is, as Guilherme said, is an university, an Adventist university in Brazil, in which we have over 4,000 students by now. And one of the subjects, one of the bachelor degrees there is translation studies. So most of us have been or are students there. Renata, for example, she has already graduated long time ago. She works with translation now, and some of us are still studying there. Some have graduated, and we appreciate the opportunity. I think I speak in behalf of all of us. We appreciate the opportunity of getting to have this experience of listening to some very interesting presentations, panels, and also being able to help develop our experience and help people who can't by now understand English to have access to this content. We would like to introduce you to our university. We have a video to show now. I think Stephen has the ability to show, and we will be presenting our university. And you are welcome to visit Brazil. We'll welcome you with open arms. You can stay wherever you want. Most of us are from different states, so wherever you go, you have a home, you have someone to know, and you are welcome in our university as well.
Hello, have you heard of UNASP Campus Engenheiro Coelho? We are more than 6,000 students. We are the biggest Adventist boarding school in the world. A huge campus with 300 apartments to accommodate more than 1,500 students in our dormitories. Our communication department is classified among the top 20 of the country. We have journalism, advertisement, and radio and TV. We have 17 awarded bachelor and master degree programs. Furthermore, UNASP offers administration, architecture and urbanism, accounting sciences, law, civil, agronomical and production engineering, history, music, pedagogy, theology, and translator degrees. Students from everywhere are welcome. We are connected with the world. We receive students from every continent. Moreover, we have exchange programs with many universities around the globe, and this enforces the focus of our education, which is mission. Just last year, we sent missionaries to Paraguay, Lebanon, Greece, Mozambique, Peru, India, Uruguay, Spain, and Albania. Apart from this, we have the 1040 Window Program, a pioneer project in the Adventist Church. We receive every year selected students from the 1040 window. They come to our campus with full scholarships, free of charge, and they learn languages and receive their education. After graduation, they go back to their countries to be missionaries. For 30 years, UNASP has led students to excellence and goes beyond teaching. Our purpose is to prepare students for mission, for Christian service, and to be good citizens. This is our campus, a place to become a professional, a place for diversity, a place for spiritual life, a place for joy. UNASPI, your place.
And thank you all to our translators. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Joseir. Thank you, Renata. Thank you, Camila. And thank you, Yuri. All of you have, in a very special way, enriched this conversation. And you have contributed to the diversity of perspectives, experiences, and nationalities that have made this Yale Adventist and Interfaith event the wonderful mosaic of social justice that it has been. So we want to extend our warm gratitude to all of you, and we wish you all good luck and Godspeed in your next journeys as professionals and as students. Thank you so much. And you can unmute yourselves if you want to.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
For the
Thank you, everyone. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. And and next up we have Professor, Dr. and Pastor Efraín Velázquez. Efraín Velázquez is the Dean of SETAI, Seminarios Teológicos Adventistas de la División Interamericana de Adventistas del Séptimo Día. And we want to extend, that's the seminaries, the Dean of Seventh-day Adventist Seminaries of the Inter-American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. And we want to extend our warm greetings to you. We want to give our support, and we want to extend a warm thank you to you and your entire team of translators that have brought this conference to the Spanish-speaking world. Thank you, and we want to give you the word to introduce us maybe to some of the translators and to say anything else that you would like to say to our audience today. And you're mute, and we're gonna fix that. Stephen and whoever's on the technology, and we can wait a little bit. And thank you for your patience.
I think now, good. All right, thank you for this opportunity of spending this journey with you. Let my people go was exciting to listen. And when I heard about this activity through Guillermo, and when I was able to get involved in it, I was really excited. And to rally a group of translators was not that complex, because we had people really excited about participating, joining from different parts of Inter-America and the spectrum. As you see behind me, you have a map of the area that we cover. We cover the central part of America and the Caribbean. So we have from Mexico to Colombia and all the islands of the Caribbean. So we have a top group of translators, people who have their graduate studies in some of them in colonialism, others in systematic theology, and others in English. And I am really appreciative of Melissa, who was there, Samuel Pagan, Denis Hidalgo, Chaplain Carlos Molina, Gerardo Udri. This group of translators was on the spot, and also Jose Briones. I think I got them all. and thanks to them for being able to join this journey that we had this weekend. And we're not the same as we began. There were facts, experiences that were shared that were really, really touching to our hearts and making our minds to be open to other views. I was glad that I was the one who was translating for the Muslim brothers and sisters, since they were using some Arabic words that I was really excited to translate, since I spent a lot of time in the Middle East as an archaeologist. And to say a little bit about our institution, we have 10 sites. We are a seminary that offers a master's in pastoral theology, also a doctorate in ministry. Also, we offer a master's in biblical studies, either Old Testament studies, New Testament studies, or systematic theology. And we have been granted to offer a PhD also in biblical studies. So right now we have about 500 students that are in Mexico. We have students in Cuba, Haiti, Costa Rica, Colombia, Venezuela, Trinidad, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. We teach in 3 languages. We teach in French, we teach in English, and we teach in Spanish. And the opportunity to give tools to people that are on difficult situations, people who are oppressed, our students who are in some countries that are right now through a lot of challenges. It's really exciting to give them the opportunity to be free through wisdom and through tools and through knowledge. And not only what we give them, we learn a lot. Every time I go to Venezuela, to Cuba, to Haiti, I tell you, I learn a lot. I learn a lot. So this opportunity to grant education, this graduate education to these countries is free. So we don't charge. I have a line of students that want to join us, and we sadly we're not able to get students that are in North America because we have plenty of opportunities and plenty of grants and so on. But we want to give priority to the people in these 45 countries. And also we have had students from Africa, students from the Middle East that they have come, and we don't charge them anything. We try to provide and cater for their educational needs. So thank you again for this opportunity. This is one of many other projects that we'll be able to do together and to have this interconfessional and interdenominational conversation to establish bridges, because we have the same goal. Let my people go. God bless you all, and thank you.
And God bless you too, Pastor. And congratulations on the accreditation. And everybody who's watching us, the word is out. If you want to help a student who is studying in one of these institutions, please feel free to reach out to Pastor Velasquez. We'll make sure to give you, is that okay, Pastor, for us to give them your contact information, and you can reach out to him. If you're interested in knowing more ways of serving and working or ministering in that part of the world, in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a beautiful place from the pictures, please reach out to Professor and Dean, I should say, Velasquez, and he will give you any information that you need. Thank you again, muchas gracias, and thank you for being a part of this. We truly appreciate you. And I will now pass the word to my colleagues.
Obrigado. And this is just to let you know how we are enjoying here. So I don't want to,
I guarantee you it's better than the weather here at Princeton, New Jersey. So I have a holy envy of your weather. And thank you so much. And now Mapilo and Stephen, you guys can proceed with our program. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Just speak on it.
Yeah, so okay, sorry, a lot of technical details here, but we just are so thankful for all of these amazing interpreters and just everyone who has come together to make this possible. I'm thinking of a few other individuals who have played just a really key role in making this conference possible. There are some people like Belinda Platt and Renee Guo who have volunteered during the time of this weekend to help make sure things flowed smoothly. So thankful for your help. I also think of some people who helped us in the preparation process. Brock Harmon from YDS has been just a huge help in setting up all of the Zoom links, and without him, this really would not have been possible in the format that we have it in today. I'm also thinking of Tom Krattenmaker, the Director of Communications at Yale Divinity School. He has helped advise us in how to promote the event and get the word out, and has used his networks as well to share the event. I'm also thinking of Lynn Sullivan, the Director of Community Equity and Inclusion at Yale Divinity School, for her just excellent advice on making sure this event is something that is just high quality and also that reaches a wide audience. So we're so thankful for you. Lynn Sullivan, and then also thinking of Jeannie Peloso, who is the Dean of Student Affairs at Yale Divinity School. Dean Peloso has been with us for months, meeting with us regularly, helping us to find contacts for presenters, for sponsors, for just giving us wise advice on how to run an event. And so we are just incredibly grateful to Dean Peloso for all of your excellent work. I want to pass it on to Ampilo Norris now for a few other acknowledgements.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. I just want to echo the sentiments that Stephen had to all the wonderful individuals who have helped us that he's described. I just want to take a moment to recognize a few other people that you didn't see today, some of which you have, some you may not have, who have helped us from the foundational portions of this planning process. When we were still figuring out what direction we wanted to take the conference, what content we wanted to include, how to organize a conference, because Steve and I have never done something like this before. These individuals that I'm about to mention were with us and worked with us for hours and listened to our thoughts and ideas and helped us cultivate our ideas to make this conference the way it is today. The first person I want to thank is Kristen Estabrook. She was actually one of the directors for Connect, the very first presentation we heard Saturday morning, talking about the Clean Slate campaign. She was running the slides, but she was also there from the beginning, meeting with me, meeting with Steve, hearing our ideas and giving us ideas on how to make this conference impactful and how to make it meaningful for all of you. Secondly, I want to thank Pastor Daniqua Washington. She's a pastor at a local church here in New Haven, and she has also been incredible in inspiring us to take a very bold approach to this conference, to not just talk about the issue superficially, but to get into the nitty gritty, to talk about controversial issues, to talk about real issues, to talk about issues that need to be discussed. And I think it's because of her that we've been inspired to really challenge ourselves beyond our own comfort zone. When it comes to religion, going back to our roots, our abolitionist roots. When it comes to individuals as a society, challenging our mental predispositions and challenging the very nature of ourselves to be something that's more holistic and more conducive for our society. And I think you've seen that expressed in the caliber of content that we've seen throughout the weekend. And lastly, I want to thank Pastor Orlando Yarborough III, who is the pastor of the Black Church at Yale here at Yale. He has also been someone that I consider a mentor, who has sat with me personally on the phone for hours, many a time, is constantly checking up on me and has been a great inspiration in helping us at those first precious moments, figuring out what we wanted to do, checking over our run sheets, giving us ideas, and just guiding us in the straight and narrow when it comes to this project. So we want to thank them. We know that there are many others who unfortunately we're not able to mention today, but you know who you are, and we want to thank you so much for all the work that you've done in inspiring us and making this a reality for everyone and all those to come who will see this later online. At this time, we want to spotlight a special individual by the name of Craig Brandon. Many of you have seen a lot of our promotional materials either online or on the Eventbrite, and we want to give you the person responsible for making that happen. Before we bring Craig on, I just want to quickly mention our friend Paulo Vinicius, who is running our Instagram page. All the posts that you see there have been by him. He's actually a friend of Guilherme's from Brazil. And we will post his Instagram handle in the chat so that you can see the type of work that he does and possibly use him for some of your future events or future promotional materials. But now we're going to bring it over to Craig Brandon, who's responsible for all the beautiful flyers and schedules and programming that you've seen. He's done an incredible work with us, and he's been extremely gracious and patient with us. And we want to give him an opportunity to advertise for his business at this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction. Was a pleasure working with you guys. Again, my name is Craig Brandon of Craig Brandon Designs. I had the grateful opportunity of providing the organizers with their promotional content for this conference. A lot of work, still some to do, but still good. At Craig Brandon Designs, I do logo designs, I do designs for print and social media, and also do corporate identity or branding for your business. So, please feel free to reach out to me for your design needs. I could be found on Instagram at C Brandon Designs and also on Facebook at Craig Brandon Designs. And you could also visit my website at cbrandonddesigns.myportfolio.com. I could post all that information in the chat if I'm allowed to. Once again, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to the organizers for entrusting me with providing, their promotional content for this conference. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Brandon. We really appreciate all of the work that you have done. We want to keep things moving. We wanted to share a lot more resources with you, but at this point we don't have time for that. So we will send you an email and more resources in the future. But there are just two organizations I want to highlight. There's an organization called Ending Mass Incarceration. If you were in our panel last night, you would have heard Rabbi Lydia Medwin mention it. They actually put a conference on last year called Let My People Go, and it was an interfaith conference on mass incarceration, so very similar to what we're doing. And exploring their website, they have just so many resources. If you want to learn more, I just cannot recommend enough that you go check them out and see what they're doing. In 2022, they will be putting on another conference as well, and I believe they'll be posting more information about that on their site in the near future. Another organization, if you are local here in Connecticut, is Emerge Connecticut. It is a reentry organization that employs formerly incarcerated people in a variety of jobs, landscaping, construction, things like that. So if you are a local homeowner, business owner, if you can use any of these services, then I would just really encourage you to check out Emerge Connecticut. With that, I'm going to pass the mic on to Mpilo Norris to share a little bit about a certificate option that we want to give to you. And here's Mpilo.
Okay, everyone. We just wanted to provide you all with an opportunity to identify the fact that you came to this conference and to have a memorandum and some sort of certification to show that you came, you participated, you learned, and you've grown. I know many in our international audience really appreciate these type of tokens, and so we want to make that available for you. What we'll be doing is we will be asking that everyone who is interested in receiving a certificate from our program, from our section of Yale University, to simply send an email to the email that we're going to be putting in the chat. I believe it's going to be yaleadventist@gmail.com. We'll put the email in the chat right now. Send us a 100-word testimonial. It can be in English, it can be in Spanish, it can be in Portuguese, just indicating that you came to the conference and also your reflections and thoughts on the conference itself. If you do that, what we'll do is we'll take your name, we'll put it in a certificate, and we'll send that to you, and you can use that for your records, for your portfolio, for your resume, whatever you may need it for. So again, send a 100-word testimonial to the email that is now in the chat, yaleadventist@gmail.com. We will receive that, and we will give you a certificate based on your doing that. Now, we would like that. We're pushing for Wednesday night. So please get it to us by Wednesday night so that we can get that done and processed as quickly as possible. We'll also be sending out an email to everyone who is registered with that option as well, so as to remind you. So again, 100-word testimonial to yaleadventist@gmail.com. Now with that, It is now 12:15, and so we want to move right into our last and final presenter, Miss Claudia Allen. I'll just tell a quick story about her. Steve mentioned her to me, and I wasn't very familiar with it. I guess I wasn't in the know. But when I had the opportunity to speak with her and meet with her as we were preparing for the conference, let me tell you, that hour conversation that we had flew by. And Steve and I, we looked at each other and we could have just sat there for another hour, maybe another 2 hours, just eating up all that she had to say. So we wanted to give you a token of our wonderful experience that we had with her today. She has a wonderful presentation, and I'll give you the title of that presentation. It is called Creating a Criminal, Prophecy, and Mass Incarceration in the Book of Daniel. I got really excited when I heard that title, and I think it's going to be quite riveting. I want to give you just a little bit more information about Claudia so you know where she's coming from, who she is, and why she's so special to us. Here we go. Claudia Allen is a highly sought after international public speaker. She has spoken for several universities, churches, and organizations. As a writer, she has published articles on faith, culture, injustice in religious and non-religious magazines and journals. She is a contributing author to Reverend Dr. Gail Fisher Stewart's latest book, Preaching Black Lives Matter, and Dr. Murray Jackson and Nathan Brown's forthcoming book, A House on Fire: Why Anti-Racism is an Adventist Imperative. After earning her bachelor's in English and a minor in leadership in 2013 from Andrews University, Claudia went on to Georgetown University, where she subsequently graduated with her master's in English in 2015. Claudia completed a certificate in theology and racialized policing from Sojourners Howard University School of Divinity and the Christian Community Development Association in June of 2020. Currently, Claudia is the online content manager for Message Magazine with her co-hosted podcast, What's the Message? Claudia has interviewed individuals like Sean King, Reverend Dr. Gail Fisher Stewart, Jim Wallace, Reverend Willow Lamar IV, Dr. Carlton P. Bird, Dr. Lisa Bowens, and several other distinguished guests. This is truly an amazing individual, and we believe that you will not be disappointed after the presentation. So with that, the next voice you will hear will be Claudia M. Allen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I am so excited to have the opportunity to present for this conference. I'd really like to thank Stephen and Mpilo for the invitation. It's been so great meeting and getting to know you, Stephen, and I just truly look forward to everything that you both have going for you. It's just amazing to see your presence, your leadership here at work at Yale Divinity School. I won't labor the point. We are at the end, and so I pray that what we discuss together in this moment is empowering and encouraging and inspiring to you. So I will begin with a quote. "The law did not protect us, and now in your time, the law has become an excuse for stopping and frisking you," which is to say, for furthering the assault on your body. But a society that protects some people through a safety net of schools, government-backed home loans, and ancestral wealth, but can only protect you with a club of criminal justice, has either failed at enforcing its good intentions or has succeeded at something much darker. However, you call it, the result was our infirmity before the criminal forces of the world. It does not matter if the agent of those forces is white or black. What matters is our condition. What matters is the system that makes your body breakable. Ta-Nehisi Coates penned these words to his son in his critically acclaimed book, Between the World and Me. In this work, Coates builds on the epistle of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time to convey the dangerous reality of living while Black in America. More specifically, Coates exposes the preoccupation with the surveillance of Black bodies and how the historic need to control and punish those bodies remains in full force today. In fact, Princeton professor Mark Lewis Taylor writes, quote, "The police are often the front line for surveillance, control, and dissemination of terror in poor communities," end quote. However, my goal is to highlight the reality that Black bodies have been systematically criminalized for the purpose of economic exploitation and social control. Rather than possessing an inherent criminality, America has created a criminal for the purpose of mass incarceration with the aim to confine Black bodies back to a position of enslavement as a means of extracting cheap labor. This practice of systems and governments is not new. In fact, we see this practice in Daniel 6. Exploring the history of policing and the prison industrial complex, I will then link our current system of retribution to the story of Daniel in the hopes of inspiring us to understand the spiritual and prophetic requirement of the church to dismantle sinful and oppressive systems and practices. The practice of caging criminals is a relatively new and distinctively American endeavor. Mark Lamont Hill, in his book Nobody, Casualties of America's War on the Vulnerable from Ferguson to Flint and Beyond, details how incarcerated Black bodies in America are perceived as disposable. He makes such a claim by providing the reader with insight into the history of imprisonment. Recalling the medieval period, Hill records how, quote, criminals were sentenced to the recesses of castles or the galleys of ships or transported to distant colonies. The English, for instance, sent many criminals to their colonies in America and later Australia, end quote. As the colonial period progressed in America, Hill chronicles how criminals were held in stocks or cages for the public to cheer, even participate in their flogging. Jails, as we know them, quote, were not used for punishment per se. They were where you parked the accused until a trial could be arranged or a punishment settled, end quote. This produced great debate amongst religious communities during the 18th century, but particularly the Pennsylvania Quakers. While they were inquiring about the reformation and potential rehabilitation of the criminal, most in this early American society were committed to the notion that all criminals should be marginalized outside of community. Hill states, quote, "The idea was to cut the outlaw class from the body politic like a tumor and cast it out to where it would never be seen again," end quote. In other words, America has always approached crime and punishment from the position of disenfranchising and ostracizing whoever society deems criminal or outlaw, end quote. Michelle Alexander further substantiates these claims in her seminal work, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. The quintessential offering on the correlation between race and mass incarceration, Alexander reveals that the problem of mass incarceration is rather the intentional construction of a system dedicated to and dependent upon the mass production of goods at the hands of forced and exploited laborers. This system is initiated after the emancipation of the slaves. During the period of Reconstruction, African Americans, particularly those in the South, experienced a short period of prosperity. During the late 1800s, African Americans participated in democracy, they voted, and even were elected officials to some of the highest echelons of this country in the Senate and the House of Representatives. Alexander writes, quote, "While the Reconstruction era was fraught with corruption and arguably doomed by the lack of land reform, the sweeping economic and political developments in that period did appear, at least for a time, to have the potential to seriously undermine, if not completely eradicate, the racial caste system in the South," end quote. She continues, quote, "With the protection of federal troops, African Americans began to vote in large numbers and seize control in some areas of the local political apparatus. literacy rates climbed and educated Blacks began to populate legislatures, open schools, and initiate successful businesses, end quote. So that by only 3 years after the dawning of the Reconstruction era in 1870, at least 70% of all Southern elected officials were Black. Right on the heels of the Civil War, white America was nowhere near comfortable with this reality and the subsequent notion of Black people as equal. In fact, the very demographic that was responsible for the work of their economic uplift immediately became their equal in competition in the workforce, yea, their superior in the political realm. Such a reality inflamed the white supremacist terror of this period, resulting in decades of lynching and the creation of what is called Black codes. Douglas Blackmun explains that Black codes in his seminal work, Slavery by Another Name, are, quote, where legislatures create laws that intentionally seek to criminalize. He writes, quote, across the South, the state legislators of every state passed laws which began to effectively criminalize Black life and to create a situation in which African-American men found it almost impossible not to be in violation of some misdemeanor statute at almost all times. And the most broadly applied of those was that it was against the law if you were unable to prove at any given moment that you were employed. These were called vagrancy laws, end quote. Vagrancy laws were basically, like he said, if you could not prove that you were employed, you were oftentimes arrested. In other words, Southern states began creating laws that were specifically targeted at African Americans for the purpose of creating them into criminals. Dominique Gilliard, in his book, Rethinking Incarceration, gives examples of some of these Black codes. For example, quote, no Negro shall be permitted to preach, exhort, or otherwise declaim to congregations of colored people without a special permission in writing from the president of the police jury, end quote. Or what about this one? Quote, it shall be the duty of every citizen to act as a police officer for the detection of offenses and the apprehension of offenders, who shall be immediately handed over to the proper captain or chief of patrol, end quote. I can't help but be drawn to this particular Black code, seeing as how we are literally under the 9th anniversary of the murder of Trayvon Martin on February 26, 7:30 p.m. in Florida. A vigilante, George Zimmerman, took it upon himself to, as is stated in this Black code, to act as a citizen, that is to act as a police officer for the detection of offenses and the apprehension of offenders. And he apprehended Trayvon Martin, and all because he suspected this young Black boy who was literally just walking from a corner store wearing a hoodie, holding nothing but Skittles and an Arizona iced tea. He suspected this young man to be a criminal because, as I will show in this presentation, Blackness has been identified as criminal. Blackness has been perceived as inherently possessing guilt. In other words, the contemporary feeling amongst African Americans that all aspects of Black life is controlled or patrolled is not arbitrary, nor is it unfounded paranoia. Whether the patrolling and recapture of slaves or the patrolling and capture of your pastor who did not get permission to preach, African Americans' bodies and actions have always been stopped and frisked. In fact, while we no longer have what are legally or socially delineated as Black codes, Ben Crump, in his book Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People, talks about the lengths local and federal administrators go to in order to criminalize the innocent. In his captivating text, Crump opens with the story of a gentleman named Irvin Leon Edwards in his chapter entitled Creating a Criminal. In November of 2013, Edwards was arguing with his girlfriend while gassing up their car in Port Allen, Louisiana. By the time the police arrived on the scene, the argument had subsided. So the officers proceeded to arrest and charge Edwards with wearing, hear me, baggy pants. Port Allen City Council passed an ordinance requiring pants to be secured at the waist in 2007. The punishment for the offense was a fine of $25 to $250. In 2015, a video suddenly surfaced showing 6 officers struggling Edwards face down to the ground of a concrete cell, tasing him continuously for several minutes. Crump writes, quote, midway through the tasing, Edwards went limp. At that point, the officers left Edwards alone for nearly 10 minutes before returning to the cell to find him lifeless, end quote. Laws like the ordinance against wearing baggy pants are contemporary laws that, upon deep investigation, are more sinister than they appear on the surface. In fact, Crump believes you cannot determine the nature of a law just from its title, as, quote, there may be something quite different actually hiding inside of it, end quote. To illustrate this point, he tells a story of 2 bitter political rivals from the North and from the South. Wanting to show deference, the rival from the South invites his rival from the North to his home for a drink. They aim to bury the hatchet after their heated debate. And the rival from the North, who won the debate, accepted a drink poured by the rival of the South from a bottle of cognac with a Remy Martin label wrapped around it. Now, the rival from the North told him mockingly, quote, I'm glad that you don't have any hard feelings over the outcome of the debate this afternoon, end quote. And the rival from the South smiled and said, no hard feelings at all. What the Southern politician didn't tell him was that the bottle didn't have cognac in it, but his own urine. Unfortunately, many of America's laws are like this. They declare the desire to maintain law and order, to treat all citizens equally, and to give every person the right to be innocent until proven guilty. But too many of us know this wish is not a reality. So many Black, brown, and indigenous communities are duped into consuming the laws of the land only to later discover the toxicity they contain. Crump writes, quote, lawmakers have long used the power of the pen to discriminate against minority groups in order to uphold this country's dedication to white supremacy. For centuries, legislators have hidden ignoble agendas behind high-minded laws that they present as beneficial for all, end quote. It is these kinds of ambiguous laws that create what Crump refers to as legislative intent. This just simply means that, quote, when a law is ambiguous, interpreters of the law look to legislative intent to determine how the law should be applied, end quote. This is oftentimes done to the detriment of Black, indigenous people of color. This is particularly seen in the federal initiative known as the War on Drugs. Michelle Alexander purports that the ambiguous and sinister nature of this attempt at law and order is at the heart of our mass incarceration issue. She writes, quote, nothing has contributed more to the systematic mass incarceration of people of color in the United States than this ongoing war, unquote. Furthermore, she goes on to suggest that it is this effort, this effort has required and supported a kind of policing that infringes upon the constitutional rights of American citizens of color. Quote, virtually all constitutionally protected civil liberties have been undermined by the drug war. The court has been busy in recent years approving mandatory drug testing of employees and students, upholding random searches and sweeps of public schools and students, permitting police to obtain search warrants based on an anonymous informant's tip, expanding the government's wiretapping authority, legitimating the use of paid unidentified informants by police and prosecutors, approving the use of helicopter surveillance of homes without a warrant, and allowing the forfeiture of cash, homes, and other property based on unproven allegations of illegal drug activity, end quote. This obstruction of law and its breach of the Constitution has led to the deaths of people like Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old Black woman who was killed sleeping in her bed as police officers burst into her home after midnight on a drug raid, claiming that her home and ex-boyfriend were involved in drug activity. Stated more plainly, when we talk about mass incarceration, we are talking about the criminalization of Black people. We're talking about the control and surveillance of Black people. And we're talking about the economic exploitation of Black people. Highlighting the hidden clause of the 13th Amendment, Dominique Gilliard details how prisons garner millions of dollars off of the labor of incarcerated persons. Dominique Gilliard explains that convict leasing was so prevalent that in 1898, quote, convict leasing supplied 73% of Alabama's entire annual state revenue, end quote. This is reinstituted in prison labor today. Gilliard documents how in 1979, Congress passed a bill that permitted large companies to begin exploiting convict labor. According to the Department of Justice, quote, the Prison Industry Enhancement Certification Program, or PIECP, exempts certified state and local departments of corrections from normal restrictions on the sale of inmate-made goods in interstate commerce. In addition, the program lifts restrictions on these certified corrections departments, permitting them to sell inmate goods to the federal government in amounts exceeding the $10,000 maximum normally imposed on such transactions, end quote. Gilliard responds that while this may have been the goal, such a program has, quote, led to incarcerated laborers being exploited for their labor in vocations ranging from mining to agriculture and manufacturing work, and doing work such as farming, putting out wildfires, building airplane parts, constructing military weaponry, and sewing lingerie garments, end quote. One would think that workers who have years of experience in these fields of production would be able to then get hired within these very companies upon their release. But this is never the case. In the words of Gilliard, quote, their work, it seems, is only desired when it is exploitable, end quote. This is what Kelly Brown Douglas means when she says, quote, the criminal was literally made into the chattel, end quote. In her book, Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God, Douglas purports that, quote, through the punishment of forced labor, they again were deprived of the right to own their laboring bodies. The chattel identity was subtly reconstructed as a criminal identity, end quote. So when we think about the sinister potency of the prison industrial complex and the uniquely American dilemma of mass incarceration, we are merely looking at, in the words of Michelle Alexander, the new Jim Crow. Douglas takes this a step further, claiming, quote, the prison industrial complex harkens back to slavery. It maintains the narrative of slavery that the Black body is not meant to be free. It returns the Black body to its proper place. It virtually re-enslaves the Black body by putting it behind bars. If the Black criminal is the new chattel, the prison industrial complex is the new slaveocracy, end quote. This reveals that America has not eradicated its need for slavery, nor emancipated its prisoners. Instead, they have merely reconstructed their system and criminalized their prisoners so as to maintain their practice of economic advancement off the broken and exploited backs of African people. American society has been successful at turning Black people into criminals with the help of mainstream media. Douglas documents how scholars and researchers have done a series of studies on crime and the media's coverage of crime. In these studies, the conclusion across the board is that there is an overwhelming focus on crime, drug use, gang violence, and other forms of antisocial behavior among African Americans, end quote. This is for the purpose of perpetuating the image and narrative of the dangerous Black body. She writes, quote, in a study on the cover stories about crime in Time and Newsweek magazines from 1946 to 1995, Melissa Hickman found that even though the later covers tried to avoid direct references to race, the abiding image in the cover stories is one of dark and dangerous street criminals from whom our only protection is the thin blue line, end quote. This narrative has impacted not only the mass population's perception of Black people as inherently criminal, but it has deeply influenced how officers police. In 2001, Joshua Carell and other psychologists did a study entitled The Police Officer's Dilemma, using ethnicity to disambiguate potentially threatening individuals. In this study, Carell had officers play a video game. In the video game, some of the men were armed and others were not. The purpose of the game was for officers to shoot armed subjects. The conclusion of the study discovered that participating officers were more likely to shoot unarmed Black subjects, rarely shot armed Black subjects, and were even less likely to shoot white subjects, armed or not. In other words, this creation of the Black criminal has led to the mass incarceration of people, the economic exploitation of the incarcerated, and the unarmed killings of Black men and women. In other words, an administration that purposefully refrains from defining the criminal behavior, but instead defines a group of citizens as criminal, is an administration with, as Crump declared, possesses darker intentions. It's one thing for the law to stand and accuse me of wrongdoing, but it's another thing when that law's ability to accuse me has been engineered for the purpose of my demise, exploitation, and even death. And when we open our Bibles and turn to the book of Daniel chapter 6, we find our prophet seasoned at the age of 84, embarking on the beginning of Babylon's transition of power to Medo-Persia. And this administration's first act of business is to write a vague law targeting individuals for suspicion of crime based on his race, ethnicity, religion, and national origin. In other words, at the top of Daniel 6, we watch an administration make a criminal out of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 and 5, the Bible says, so the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. I like how the Christian Standard Bible puts it. It says, they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. So these satraps, these governors, these congressmen, if you would, declare, we will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God. And immediately here, we see the Medo-Persian Empire create the law that they need to incriminate the man they hate. We see the Cyrus administration sign a decree into law targeting a person already held in captivity, a law targeting a person deemed inferior because of his nation of origin, a law targeting a person vulnerable because of the peculiarity of his religion. And when this administration sought to legislate morality, when this administration attempted to criminalize religious practice, when this administration attempted to ban the freedom of religious expression, Daniel prayed. Verse 10 of chapter 6 declares, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. And here we see Daniel engaging in the 3 daily prayers required of Judaism. Shakarit, the morning prayer, Minka'ah, the afternoon prayer, and Ma'ariv, the evening prayer. In other words, Daniel does not hear of this decree and then find it important to begin praying. Daniel does not begin his prayer life at the impetus of crisis or captivity. Daniel always prayed 3 times a day. And when the Bible declares that he prayed 3 times a day, as was his custom since early days, we can infer that Daniel prayed on the 700-mile journey from Judea to Babylon. Daniel prayed when they changed his name to Belteshazzar. Daniel prayed when they performed an illegal vasectomy on him. Daniel didn't pray because he was in crisis. Daniel prayed because he believed in constant communion with God. Now, as the text continues, it writes that Daniel was in his upper room and he opened the windows towards Jerusalem to pray. And according to Uwe Michael Lang in his book, Turning Towards the Lord, Orientation in Liturgical Prayer, quote, Jews in the diaspora prayed towards Jerusalem, or more precisely towards the presence of the transcendent God, Shekinah, in the Holy of Holies of the temple, even after the destruction of the temple. The prevailing custom of turning towards Jerusalem for prayer was kept in the liturgy of the synagogue. Thus, Jews have expressed their eschatological hope for the coming of the Messiah, the rebuilding of the temple, and the gathering of God's people from the diaspora, end quote. In other words, when Daniel hears of this edict elusively designed to restrict his freedom of religious expression, when it is time for his daily prayer practice, he faces Jerusalem with an open window as man held captive in a strange land, looking towards the hope of a Messiah that will come and will rebuild the temple and gather his people from the diverse places of their captivity. See, Daniel praying towards Jerusalem is his daily practice of hope that one day he will be free, not just from Babylon, not just from Medo-Persia, but from every earthly system and every earthly nation that seeks to restrict his worship of the Creator God. Daniel facing Jerusalem is Daniel assuming a posture of prayer, assuming the position of facing himself toward God himself, facing himself toward the holies of holies. And when Daniel did this, he turned his prayer practice into a protest. So that in the life of Daniel, we learn that it is important that even in our fight against these unjust laws, even in our fight against these vague laws created to create criminals, we learn that prayer is a weapon. Prayer is a weapon and a practice for protest. Bible then says the Medo-Persian satraps saw Daniel praying just as scheduled. And they went to King Cyrus and they say, didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days, any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, as a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. So this House of Representatives replied, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict that you have signed, for he prays 3 times a day. Immediately, Daniel the prophet became Daniel the criminal. Daniel the faithful became Daniel the criminal. Daniel the captive became Daniel the criminal, not because he did anything wrong, not because he did something illegal. And what we must understand is that there is an entire demographic of people caged, locked behind bars, disenfranchised, used for exploitive labor, barred from voting and employment, dead, not because they did anything wrong, but because they did something that this broken system determined was illegal for the express purpose of restricting and removing them from society, just like the governors of Medo-Persia did with Daniel. Right now, there are men and women in the lions' dens of mass incarceration for non-violent offenses, men and women dead by the lion's den of a corrupt criminal justice system for wearing baggy pants, sleeping during a drug raid, walking with Skittles and Arizona iced tea, sitting at home eating ice cream. And if we are going to be the Daniels of our time, the church cannot wait for the day when we will be put behind bars for Bible study. The church cannot wait for the day when we are thrown into our lion's den for prayer. We must see Daniel's story and the story of every convicted person as a call to rebuke these unjust systems now. We must hold our leaders accountable now. We must ensure that new laws are passed and enforced that make sure that no more Daniels, no more faithful, trustworthy men and women whom societies can find no fault or corruption within find themselves imprisoned unjustly, find themselves locked behind the stone of bars, locked in their lion's den. The power of the story of Daniel, as we all know, comes at the end when the stone is rolled away and Daniel climbs out of that lion den declaring, "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me. For I was found innocent before him, and also before you, your majesty, I have done no harm." And if I'm honest this afternoon, this text in particular troubles me because there are men and women incarcerated right now who don't have that praise. They too were innocent before God and have done no harm to those accusing them, and yet they still sit in the bowels of their lion's den. We cannot even say that God has shut the lions' mouths, as many young men tried as adults, innocent of their crimes, have been lynched, electrocuted, injected, and for those not on death row, raped and abused in their lions' dens. I can't help but mourn over the bites Kalief Browder experienced in his lion's den. Bites Corey Wise and the Exonerated Five experienced in their lion's den. The bites Irvin Edwards experienced in his lion's den. The bites the Black women experience in their lion's den. Women who historically have been locked up for petty theft. Women who have stolen from grocery stores for the sole purpose of receiving dental care, or pregnant women who have stolen from corner stores so that they can go to prison for the sole purpose of receiving prenatal care. Talking about men and women forever changed, forever mauled, some of which, Kalief Browder and Irvin Edwards, are dead as a result of being the consumption of America's lion's den. And as I wrestled with this text and the fact that we see in this passage of scripture a man sentenced to prison for a non-violent crime, a man sentenced to death row for faulty claims, one of our favorite Bible characters, a victim of an unjust criminal justice system, I struggled. Where is the hope for men and women who never saw deliverance from their lions' dens? Where is the hope for the men and women who were unjustly devoured by lions in their prison cells? Maybe even the lions' dens, or the lions rather, that have left with many of these men and women the moment that they are released, so that you have individuals like Kalief Browder, so burdened, so troubled, so overwhelmed by the mauling of those lions, that they cannot at any point find peace or reason to live in the free world. So they commit suicide because of how they were mauled by lions in our prison system. At that moment, the Lord directed my eyes to Daniel chapter 6 and verse 24. And the Bible says that the king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lions' den. They, their children, and their wives. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. And being that Daniel is a prophetic book, I cannot help but believe that in this verse, we see Daniel showing us that every official, every leader, every governor, every person who has aided in the sinister design of laws and decrees, unjustly targeting, arresting, killing, and imprisoning people for no other reason than their race or religion, or maybe you are even being a church member, a disciple of Christ, a faith believer, someone who believes in and follows God according to your understanding and tradition, and you have in your faith remained implicit, complacent, and paralyzed to dealing with this reality. God says that those individuals will experience the penalty that they have designed for someone else. And so we see here that the very men that tried to orchestrate Daniel's demise ultimately received their own punishment upon his release. And the reality is, like I said, there are men and women right now who are being mauled and devoured by the lion's den of our mass incarceration prison industrial complex here in America. And the truth is that many of them will not experience the kind of liberation that Daniel experienced here in chapter 6 until the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. But until that day, when the unremorseful orchestrators of mass incarceration are punished for their crimes by God himself, we as communities of faith, we as believers in God, as believers in Yahweh, as believers in Jehovah, as believers in Allah, as believers in Jesus Christ, leaders of faith-based organizations, we must commit to becoming champions of the manifestation of biblical restoration. We must become champions of biblical justice. We cannot call ourselves disciples of Jesus Christ, see that there are people who are imprisoned, see that there are people who are literally being made into criminals for the purpose of economic exploitation in this country, and not seek to intervene on behalf of their liberty. Seek to intervene on behalf of their justice. Dominique Gilliard writes, quote, "Justice is about relationships, but it is not simply about personal relationships. Justice is primarily about how systems, structures, and institutions relate to people. Justice, like faith, is both individual and social," end quote. Therefore, he continues, quote, "Justice summons the church to social stewardship, to the toilsome work of cultivating communities that were communities where communal flourishing and shalom are not infringed by systemic injustice, institutional greed, or legislation that dehumanizes people, groups, and neighborhoods," end quote. In other words, when Jesus said in the Gospel of John that I go, that you might receive the Holy Spirit, so that you can be empowered to do greater works than these that I have done, Jesus himself is declaring that our discipleship is intimately attached to the work of justice. Our discipleship is attached to the people that we visit in prison. It's attached to the people that we clothe who are naked. It's attached to the people who we feed that are hungry, the people we give drink that are thirsty. But Jesus also lets us know that our call to do justice, our call to walk and emulate his example, goes further than even just meeting those temporal surface needs. What we see and learn in the example of Christ is that that call also requires that the Spirit of the Lord come upon us as he came upon Jesus in Luke 4, to set the captives free, to loose the chains from those that are in bondage. In other words, Christ is looking at us to see how we are going to dismantle mass incarceration. Christ is looking at the church to be at the forefront, leading the cause that opens these gated bars, puts a key into the cages of incarceration, and lets people who have been created into criminals free. May we have the courage to look for the evidence of things not seen, to look for the evidence that goes beyond the criminalization of Black and Brown and Indigenous people. May we look for the evidence of things that saves and redeems and restores and rehabilitates and brings back into community. May we save the lives and souls of people deemed invisible and disposable. Thank you so much for your time.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. We just want to thank Claudia Allen for such a riveting, inspirational, and informative conversation for us, for inspiring us, as she says, to be the key that unlocks the cages of mass incarceration and to look out for the Daniels that we see in our own day. You know, Christ is calling us, Allah is calling us, all sorts of spiritual forces are calling us to take on the mantle of justice in our world today, to break down strongholds of darkness and evil. And I think Claudia tied it up together very, very well in a masterful way. I want us to end on that high note. So I'm going to limit my commentary and make it very brief. We just want to thank everyone again so much for participating with us throughout this weekend, for joining in and going on this journey with us. We've come full circle now, and we hope that are inspired. We hope that you have been encouraged. We hope that you have learned. We hope that you have been equipped with knowledge to go out and make changes. I said at the beginning that we are all the lights that are supposed to dispel the darkness in this world. And we hope that you will take the messages that you have learned from here and make change in your own pockets, in your own communities, and in your own worlds. So unfortunately, this concludes our conference, but we are so happy with what it has become. We are putting in some information in the chat for you, just some final pieces of information, some final contact information. We will be in contact with you as the days progress, just sending you more information and a few more reminders and a few more resources that can be useful. We encourage you to stay connected with us on our Facebook page, Yale Adventist Campus Fellowship, and at our Instagram, which is at Yale ACF, literally ACF. And we hope that you will continue to work with us and network with us as we push the mission of goodness, we push the mission of righteousness forward in this world. Again, we want to thank all our panelists, all our presenters, not just from today, but throughout the weekend, all our translators, everyone who has worked with us to make this a possibility. We want to thank our sponsors, particularly for this moment, the Northeastern Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, but all our sponsors who have been so generous before this conference and even throughout to make this a possibility. So thank you all. God bless. And we hope to see you in the next event. Thank you.